Media firestorm after newly released documents allege campaign election laws were broken. I'm Charlie Sykes. Sunday Insight starts right now. Good morning and welcome to Sunday Insight. In the week that was, more bad poll numbers for the president. In a new NBC Wall Street Journal poll, just 37% of Americans approve of President Obama's foreign policy, and it gets worse. 54% of Americans now say they don't think that President Obama has the ability to lead the country anymore. Brett Favre appears in an ad for an embattled U.S. senator down in Mississippi. Some observers suggest it's sort of a Hail Mary pass. Really lousy weather slams our area, but you knew that. And a federal judge stays her ruling allowing gay marriage in Wisconsin pending appeal. But we start with the big John Doe document dump. Now, the headlines were huge, but what's the real story here? For several years, prosecutors have been targeting conservative groups and Governor Scott Walker's campaign, alleging they had coordinated their campaigns to fight off the recall attempts. Prosecutors said that was illegal, but two judges, one state judge, one federal judge, have already ruled against them, saying there was no crime at all. Here's what the presiding judge in the John Doe, Gregory Peterson, ruled. Quote, I conclude the subpoenas do not show probable cause that the moving parties committed any violations of the campaign finance laws. Therefore, the subpoenas fail to show probable cause that a crime was committed. In other words, the judge rejected the prosecutor's theory that there was a criminal scheme, and he threw out the subpoenas and essentially shut down the probe. In federal court, it was the same story. Judge Rudolph Randa ruled that it was, quote, unlawful to target the plaintiffs for engaging in vigorous advocacy that is beyond the state's regulatory reach. Judge Randa also rejected the prosecutor's theory, ruling that what the groups and Walker were doing was protected by the First Amendment of the Constitution. Judge Randa also said that no crime was committed and ordered the probe shut down. Which brings us to last week's screaming headlines. The arguments rejected by two courts became a banner headline and a media firestorm. Governor Scott Walker fired back on Friday.
This is a prime example of what happens when you take on the big government special interest. They're looking for ways to come at us. They'll continue to do it. They did it, 2 years ago in the recall election. They're going to do it again now. We got another tough election this fall. And so they're going to come at it with just about everything out there. And the media, at least many in the media, are willing accomplices to this. But the facts of the case are pretty clear. They're not something that I or any of our Republican allies are talking about. They're two objective judges. Third parties removed from the executive and legislative branch. Right. Both of them have looked at this information. Both have said there's not a case here, and in fact have taken it so far as to tell the prosecutors to stop their case going forward.
So the show's over, but they're trying to trash it. Are they trying to do to you what they did to Chris Christie in New Jersey?
Oh, again, I think there's no doubt this is one of those where the media jumps on this. Some of the left spin this. You get our detractors out there trying to claim there's something more than there is. And they're trying to claim an order here. Again, and I understand some people, if they haven't been following us, in our state, John Does are very unusual. They're kept, or at least supposedly kept confidential. This has already been done. And so if you're just reading this for the first time, you might think there's something there without knowing that the courts already looked at this. A state judge took care of this some time ago, and a federal judge more recently heard the same information in both cases. They said there's just not an argument there. And so what you see is the left and others up there trying to stir things up.
Joining me on our panel this morning, political consultant Mary Jo Baas, former state representative Michelle Litjens, and Mikel Holt from the Milwaukee Community Journal. Mary Jo, let's start with you. Okay, what did we learn from this document dump last Thursday?
We learned that the prosecutor is lashing out at Walker. The courts have said this is a no-go, so they're writing headlines. They are going to punish him, and they are going to make their case in public opinion, even though the judges have tried to shut it down. Okay,
was there a criminal scheme to evade campaign finance laws?
No, not only was there no scheme to break the law, there was no law in evidence. There was nothing in there that the whole premise was wrong.
But are campaigns allowed under the campaign laws to quote-unquote coordinate with independent groups? I mean, this apparently is the crime, that you had conservative groups who were talking with and working with the conservative governor to get him reelected, and that is the criminal scheme. Is that illegal?
Well, the point to be made here is that this wasn't express advocacy. Right. They weren't saying vote for Walker and saying get together. You talk to these guys, we'll talk to these guys, we'll tell them all to vote for Walker. Because these were issue ads. These were talking about specific issues. So they are not. It is not illegal.
Michael Holt, what do you make of this? Because I mean, this became a national story, and in virtually every newspaper was Governor Walker linked to criminal scheme. Prosecutors allege. How badly does that hurt him?
I think it, particularly in the short run, it does hurt him. I don't think there's any way to get around it. The fact that he is going to spend $250,000 immediately in advertising to refute these allegations speaks volumes, really. But, this also is somewhat of an indictment of the media, because when I picked up the Journal Sentinel last Friday, I said, whoa, the governor was indicted. I mean, I had to read through and get to the jump page before I figured out what was really going on.
I want to talk about the media as well. I think one of the more interesting developments of the last week, though, the last couple of days, was the fact that Governor Walker, who has been very measured and somewhat tepid in his response up until now, appears to be taking the gloves off, and he's using some very, very strong language about the John Doe.
And I am very, very proud of him, and I think there are many Americans that are very proud of him, too, for fighting back. He did the right thing. The judges said he did not break any laws. He was not charged with anything criminally, and Scott Walker has come out punching, and he said, you cannot take me down.
But a lot of people are going to say, where there's smoke, there's fire. And there were some emails there where he talks about some of his staff aides coordinating.
If there would have been anything, the district attorney would have found that, and he would have showed it to the judges, and they would have found cause for a criminal prosecution. They found nothing.
Okay, now, so what has your glass, we're going to talk more about this afterwards, but what has your glass half full, what has your glass half empty this week? Let's go around the table, Michael Holt.
Well, my glass is half full because Milwaukee police and FBI took a couple dozen thugs off the street through a coordinated street gang sweep last week. Well, my glass is half empty because it's going to take the National Guard to restore a sense of security if violence continues to escalate, as some predict.
Mary Jo Baas.
My glass is half full because this week the city of Milwaukee took one step further toward ending the taxi monopoly with a measure that would remove the cap on the number of cabs in the city and allow for free market rideshare services like Uber and Lyft. My glass is half empty because they still insist that Uber and Lyft jump through unnecessary regulatory hoops and kiss the city council's ring to receive a license to operate in the city.
Michelle Litjens.
My glass is half full because the EPA administrator said there isn't a war on coal. My glass is half empty because, yes, there is a war on coal.
Well, my glass is half full because yesterday was the longest day of the year. It's half empty because yesterday was the longest day of the year, and they all get shorter from now on. Up next, how did the media roll with the latest on the John Doe document dump? But we'll go back to what Michael had to say in just a couple of moments.
You're in a close campaign. What impact will this have on this election?
Oh, I think there will be political opponents of ours who will try to make this out to something it's not. Again, if you're an objective viewer of this, if you're a voter who's undecided, who's looking at this objectively, again, I ask people to look at the facts. The facts are pretty clear. A judge at the state and the federal level made it clear that they didn't buy into this argument.
Today's.
So the release of an old motion by John Doe prosecutors set off a media frenzy last week. But was the coverage fair, informed, and accurate? The allegations by these prosecutors were not new. They'd been rejected by the two judges, as you've heard, and the investigation had been ordered shut down because both a state and a federal judge had ruled that neither Walker's campaign or other conservative groups had broken any laws. So, Michael Holt, in the last segment, you were sort of acknowledging that when you saw the headline, though, you thought that this was a really big deal. You actually did think that the governor had been indicted.
Yeah, I mean, and I've been in the media for like 30 plus years, so I know how easy it is to sway public opinion, and then perception takes over. Now, during last Friday's talk show on radio, you aired a clip from one of the national programs.
MSNBC.
And they had these experts on using all this erroneous information. So it's very, very easy to sway people in a direction based upon ignorance.
I thought it was the decision by the editors of the Journal Sentinel to say that the governor was at the center of this criminal scheme. You had to go virtually on the online version to the second last paragraph of a 1,600-word article to find out the judge had already thrown this out. So the headline certainly could have been, judges reject prosecutors' theory, judges, shut down, whatever. but they decided to go with the most incendiary headline, and as a result of that, you had a lot of misinformed, lazy national reporters who were guppied into following that story.
This is actually exactly why the public no longer support or believes the news that's on TV. They don't believe the news that's in the newspaper because our journalists are out there actually promoting a viewpoint instead of actually reporting the news because they are directly misleading people.
Okay, Mary Jo Baas.
I would call the Journal-Sentinel headline a knowingly deceptive attack. But with the national media, I would call it willful ignorance. They don't know because they don't want to know. It looks good, it says what they want it to say, and they just ran with it.
I'm going to be just slightly nicer. I agree with you on the Journal-Sentinel headline, but on the national media, I think that, it comes over the wire, comes over Twitter. Governor Walker accused of being part of a criminal enterprise. National media guys are going to, jump on that. They're going to think it's a big story. Drudge Report put it on the front page. But what I noticed in the first 24 hours was that people in the national media who had regarded the Journal-Sentinel as a somewhat credible source suddenly began to realize, so wait, what you're actually seeing, though, is pleadings from the losing side in an old case, not an ongoing criminal investigation. And I really sensed some sort of skinning back, some backtracking on all of that when people realized that a story that had been hyped to be something really, really big. But the question, of course, and it goes back to what we were talking about in the last segment, is whether your low information voter, though, is going to understand this. Because I've spent all this time explaining, in fact, that, okay, you got the two judges who shut it down. You can say that over and over again. But for a lot of people, they go, Scott Walker, criminal scheme, he must have done something wrong.
And, the media, whether you like them or dislike them, is still very, very powerful.
Wow.
And I think because perception becomes reality, this does hurt Scott Walker. I mean, I don't think there's any way to get around it. He's on the defensive. Now, somebody's agenda is at play here. All media, there's no such thing as unbiased media. I acknowledge that. But if the agenda was to paint this picture of him being a quote-unquote criminal, then we're partially successful.
Okay, so how badly does it hurt him? Mary Jo Baas.
It does hurt him. It hurts him far more nationally than locally.
Right.
I think we're used to this locally. But he got right back out there. I think the story's good. I think the Journal-Sentinel embarrassed some of the national media, and I think they'll back off.
Well, I think, one of the questions, and I've raised this on radio, is of course, will this affect fundraising? Will there be people who will not want to write out checks?
This is going to go around completely in the opposite direction. I think this is going to be a fundraising boom for him because they are going to see him again as being attacked by the national media. And the underdog who's doing the right thing, he has not committed a crime, and he hasn't been charged with anything, and I think people are going to come forward and support him.
And for Democrats as well.
I do.
They're going to use this.
I do think there's a possibility we'll fire up the base. I kind of sensed a little bit of fatigue, a little bit of post-traumatic stress disorder on the part of people in politics. But there might be a backlash to this. Now, you may not want to hear it, but we will tell you anyway. Let's hand out some unsolicited advice. Michelle Litjens, you get to go first.
Well, Mr. President, perhaps you should listen to 65% of the country who are upset with your approach to immigration and close our country's borders.
Mikel Holt.
To Texas Governor Rick Perry, who compared homosexuality to alcoholism. I think you should kiss your hopes for a presidential bid goodbye, because it's obvious you're not ready for prime time.
Mary Jo Baas.
My unsolicited advice is to MPS in the city of Milwaukee. If you insist on using your discretionary authority to block high-performing schools like St. Marcus from access to vacant MPS buildings, don't start crying when that discretion is forcefully and conclusively taken away from you by the state legislature next session.
Well, my unsolicited advice is to Democrats. If Hillary's campaign doesn't go any better than her book tour has gone, you better have a plan B. Coming up on Sunday Insight, why the federal government has a problem with the Washington Redskins. We'll be right back. Well, what's in a name? If it's the Redskins, the federal government won't register your trademark anymore. That was the ruling of a federal panel last week that said that the Washington Redskins name was disparaging to Native Americans and scrapped federal recognition of the team's trademark. The team promised to appeal, so let's start with Michelle, your reaction to this decision.
This is just so sad that our country continues to be perpetually offended and try to save us from ever being offended by something. When a team chooses a mascot, it is a word of honor. You don't choose to be the marshmallows or the morons, right? You want to choose a name that symbolizes strength and victory. So when the Washington Redskins continue to use that name, they're doing it in a very honorable way, and they should be allowed to continue to do that.
Mikel Holt.
The exact opposite. The exact opposite. This is offensive to Native Americans. I don't even know how they're getting this far with this. Would anybody have a problem if you said the Pittsburgh Pale Skins? I mean, let's be totally
They
honest.
sound wimpy.
This is disparaging to Native. I don't have met no Native American in the last 20 years who doesn't find this to be offensive. You know, and then
The
speaking
Chiefs,
of the tail,
by the way, the Chiefs, the Braves, same thing?
Braves and Chiefs is different from Redskins, which you're bringing color into it. You know, there was a local comedian or a national comedian who tried to get the N-word trademarked a few years ago, and they said the same thing. It's offensive. So why even stay here? You can't come up with anything more creative than Redskins?
Okay, Mary Jo Baas.
Well, I just think it's typical overreach by the Obama administration to get, with so much going on in the world, with Iraq and everything else, that he is going to get into an issue that 9 out of 10 people would think have absolutely nothing to do with running the country.
You see, I think this is the key, because I think reasonable people can disagree about whether you like the Washington Redskins name, you know, whether that is offensive. It's not the most, you know, pressing issue in the country. But I think people ought to be alarmed by the use of the federal power, a federal bureaucracy that is supposed to be involved in objectively enforcing the laws of the land, starting to make political judgments like this. I mean, we've seen what happens when the FBI becomes politicized. We've seen what's happened when the IRS becomes politicized. And now we're talking about patent clerks and trademarks. So then the question is, what other expression is going to be subject to this kind of government regulation? So even if I agreed with you, which I don't, but the whole point of having these federal agencies begin to say, you know, we're gonna pick on you and we're gonna endorse you. Isn't this something that can be decided by the teams, the private owners, by the fans, by the marketplace?
So
because if you're right,
get away with anything?
well, because if you're right that people are really that offended by it, then the marketplace and the NFL can deal with this. Do we honestly need the federal government? And by the way, if we're doing trademarks and copyrights, are we going to have bureaucrats at some point saying, you know what, I don't like that book or that expression or that idea, and we're going to take away your copyright, your trademark?
We just talked about the federal courts imposing their opinion, saying that this John Doe was simply a matter of freedom of speech. So, I mean, they're
that's
doing
not
it at every...
imposing. That's actually upholding the Constitution. That's actually...
Depending on which side you're on them.
Oh, I completely agree. I think we're going down a slippery slope, and a very scary slope at that. The public, if they feel offended generally by the name of the team, they would start boycotting the advertisers. They would stop going to the games and stop supporting the team, and the owner would have no choice but to change the name. And they're not.
I also think there's going to be a backlash to this. So what is it that you don't get? Let's go around the table. Michelle Litjens, you're first.
Charlie, what I don't get is how the creation of a favela at a bar in downtown Milwaukee can make national news, but the fact that 30 African-American children have been shot this month in the same city isn't news.
Mikel Holt.
What I don't get is why we, as in the United States, believe it can be the Middle East police force. Instead of sending 300 troops to Iraq, maybe President Obama should send Dick Cheney and his daughter, since they apparently know what's best for American interests.
Mary Jo Baas.
Charlie, what I don't get is how...
The DA?
I'm sorry. How the DA can have unlimited time and resources to protect the city from free speech, but the best we can do to fight real, actual crime is to set up a silly tip line.
Yeah, the hell. So what I don't get is why the IRS makes us little people save 7 years of their personal tax information in case we ever get audited, but they can keep 6 months worth of employee emails. Oh, wait, I do get that. One set of rules for us, another set of rules for our rulers. We'll be right back, but first, here's your morning news update. It's time for our panel to pick the winners and losers of the week. Mary Jo Baas, you are first.
My winner is Wisconsin Right to Life Director Barb Lyons, who announced her retirement this week. It can be argued that no single individual has had a more consistent and lasting impact on Wisconsin politics over the last 4 decades than Barb Lyons did. Standing up for the most vulnerable members of our society, she may have been tiny in height, but she was a giant in stature. Congratulations, Barb. My loser is President Obama. In 1 week, he has nearly lost the war in Iraq, and he's presided over the IRS cover-up that makes him look like Richard Nixon on steroids. This is an administration in free fall, and they still have 2.5 years left to go.
Mikel Holt.
Well, it's bad enough that a report revealed gasoline prices in Milwaukee are nearly 20 cents higher than the national average. Now comes predictions that we could see pump prices hovering above $4 a gallon before summer's over. My winner, Tom Berry, made an excellent choice of selecting Earl Buford to replace retiring Workforce Development Board President Don Sykes. Buford is young, energetic, and committed to linking the unemployed to training and jobs.
Michelle Litjens.
The winner this week, though he might not feel this way, is Governor Walker. Few people in the world can throw the left media into such a frenzy. They fear you, which means you are winning. They won't stop until you're defeated, but don't worry, Governor, you're not alone in this fight, and we have your back. The loser is the Milwaukee political establishment. While the mayor proposes a gun hotline, innocent children are being shot and killed every day. Just fix it. Put more officers on the street and put the bad guys in jail and keep them there.
Well, my winner, Paul Ryan, the normally unflappable congressman, was visibly angry last Friday when he confronted the new IRS commissioner. Ryan is not buying claims that the IRS lost critical emails in the investigation of the IRS's targeting of conservative groups. He was right to be mad, and he's a winner for trying to get to the bottom of what increasingly looks like a cover-up. Losers, the media and the John Doe prosecutors. As Judge Rudy Randa said last week, the Democrat prosecutors appear to seek refuge in the court of public opinion, having lost in this court on the law. And the media were their willing accomplices. Thanks for joining us, and join me for my radio show Monday morning. It's on News Radio 620 WTMJ from 8:30 until noon. Have a great week.